Teachers, what's the most awkward thing you've read in a confiscated note? Story 1. Like many folks in this thread, I'm not a teacher, but when I was in first grade, I learned the hard way that passing notes can lead to some rather unpleasant consequences. I went to a small Catholic school as a kid, which included every age group from kindergarten to 8th grade. As a result of this, some of the older kids would occasionally be tasked with chaperoning the younger ones during activities and events, or in the case of what happened to me, when the teacher had a private emergency to address. On the day in question, the woman who usually taught my class was called from the room on very short notice, and 2 8th graders were left behind to make sure that we didn't get into too much mischief. Unfortunately, they were excessively bad at their job. Within moments of our teacher's departure, all of the first graders started writing and passing notes, but very few of them were actually intended for the person to whom they were ultimately delivered. Each note was a piece of performance art of a sort, meant as a teasing joke about 2 members of the class. See, a rumor had been going around that a couple of kids named Stephen and Katie were in love with each other, and the vast majority of the notes being passed were counterfeit correspondence between the 2 of them. "Dear Katie," one note might read, "I want to kiss you. Love, Stephen." At first, anyone who wrote a fake note would try to deliver it to either of the alleged lovebirds. As could be expected, though, both Stephen and Katie soon got sick of receiving these disingenuous documents, and they started to refuse them on sight. Still, not content to let their hard work go to waste, anyone who wrote one of the notes and had it rejected would then circulate it around the classroom so that everyone else could admire their hysterical handiwork. "Dear Stephen, I want to hug you. Love, Katie." "Dear Katie, I love you. Love, Stephen." "Dear Stephen, I think you're handsome. Love, Katie." "Dear Katie, I want to have hot spicy time with you. Love, Stephen." As you may have guessed, it was the last note that got me in trouble. As soon as the teacher returned and discovered the shenanigans her class had gotten up to in her absence, she collected all of the notes and gave us a lecture. Not only that, but she swore to us that she would discover the anonymous author of the infamous spicy note by comparing it to all of our handwriting. One by one, each of the students in class were tasked with writing "Dear Katie" on a piece of paper, which the teacher would then compare to the note she had confiscated. Being the innocent young fellow that I was, I made a special effort to write as well as I possibly could, and I smugly smirked when I saw that several of my classmates had, perhaps intentionally now that I think about it, misspelled both "dear" and "Katie" during their own handwriting tests. The result of this was that I, the only one who had spelled both words correctly, was named as the culprit behind the vulgar missive, even though, as I insisted, I hadn't written it. "I promise, Mrs. T," I said, probably sounding a bit frantic. "I didn't write that. I couldn't have written that." "Oh?" my teacher replied. "Why is that?" Had I been a little more level-headed, I might have thought to tell her that at the time I didn't know what spicy even meant. Oh sure, I knew about the birds and the bees, but I'd been told the act of copulation was called making love, because when a mommy and a daddy love each other, they want to make more love. As it happened, I chose instead to show her all of the notes I had written to another classmate, a girl named Janelle. "See? See?" I said, thrusting the notes at my teacher. "I was writing to Janelle. She wrote back to me. I couldn't have written that note because I wrote these." Without another word, my teacher went through the small library of letters that I handed her. I'm sure she was only checking the handwriting, again, but looking back, I can't help but blush a little bit about the things she must have read. Then again, maybe she thought they were sweet. After all, it's not every day that a first grader proposes. Sort of throwing yourself under the bus, don't you think? Getting out of trouble of writing a love note by showcasing love notes you wrote to someone else? Either that's a really good power move, or that's the most idiotic thing you could do. Very unusual. I want to know what the final verdict was. Story 2. Oh, God. Not a teacher, but oh God. When I was in middle school, I was a loner who had no friends. Well, I had one friend, and that was the 59-year-old blonde white trash janitor named Judy, who looked at the junior high as her own personal stories. Judy loved to go through the garbage she emptied to find notes, the passionate scrawlings and tempestuous correspondence between 13 to 16-year-olds. On my off period, she would find me and show them to me. They were mostly tame things, some terrible poetry poetry, a lot of bullying, but the most spicy notes, terrible teenage corn-inspired writing were in familiar handwriting between an older boy, 16, 17, and a younger girl, my age, 13 or 14. They detailed every spicy encounter, lurid details, arranged meetings, and jealous accusations, all within dozens of notes Judy found over the school year. Bad drawings of anatomy peppered the notes, as did terrible, trashy come-ons. Breakups and reconciliations, both laid out in pretty vulgar detail, were written on page after crumpled page that had once been committed to the trash, which Judy would routinely fish out and save. They were the source of a lot of speculation and entertainment on my part. It was hilariously shocking when I realized the girl was the biggest, loosest bully in my grade, but mortifyingly embarrassing when I realized the spicy fantasies laid out in the mail's hand were my brother's. Oh no! That last word. Oh, that is kind of disgusting if you were in his place. I wonder if they saved everything from the beginning to the end. On the other hand, if they collected everything, that kid had blackmail material on his brother till possibly the end of time. Story 3. I'm not a teacher, but I have something related. In 5th grade, there was this weird kid who always sat in my corner, didn't pay attention in class, and was always drawing. He never threw away his drawings, though, and he never took them home. So near the end of the year, papers were coming out of literally every crack in the desk. Well, one day, he got up from his desk, tripped, and spilled the contents of his desk everywhere. The teacher had the 3 of us closest to him get up and help him pile everything back together. So I got down to help, and as I was going through his papers one at a time when I saw something that still creeps me out to this day. It was a drawing of a Jinx. Pokemon had just started getting popular and he was obsessed, and it was really good. Every detail was almost perfect. The hair, the lips, the skin tone, the boobs, the clit. Oh, did I mention that he'd drawn Jinx fully nude? I wasn't a social genius as a kid, but even 5th grade me knew that if I breathed a word of this to anyone, that guy's social life would have been over. So I never spoke a word of it until now, of course, where I'm admitting it to 6 million people. Too long didn't read? Weird kid in class drew a graphically nude Pokemon that I found on the floor. And that kid went on to become the most talented Rule 34 artist the age of the internet has ever seen. But seriously, I think a lot of people's spicy drawing origin stories started out this way. Probably just bored in class. Good on this kid for not giving him away. I wonder if this guy made it a series. Story 4. One time I found a note where both female participants had apparently engaged in drunken, spicy time over the weekend with random guys. They described their stories to one another in detail, and then expressed their hopes that they were pregnant. They could take pregnancy tests together. Yay! Neither of them should have ever been allowed to procreate, much less at age 15. Another girl wrote in a letter to her friend that she intentionally had unprotected spicy time with her boyfriend in the pursuit of pregnancy at age 16. What the hell is with these girls? I found a note crumpled on the floor in the hallway once, but didn't know which student wrote it, which is unfortunate because he or she needed serious counseling. He or she kept talking about the dark place in their head, how crappy their home life was, and how they liked cutting themselves to relieve stress. I felt sad for that person. Story 5. Okay, so the teacher caught me passing a note to a friend. I jokingly decided to send a gay note to a friend of mine sitting 2 desks away from me. Little did I know, the teacher caught me laughing at the note when my friend passed it back, replying with a "what the hell." The note went something like this: "My veiny turgid anatomy is throbbing at the thought of your warm tube in my butt. With each second that passes, my anatomy pulsates to the smell of your hairy anatomy in my mouth. I shake with euphoria knowing that when I get home, I can self-stimulate to your handsome face." Since the teacher saw my friend passing the note to me with a reply, he thought it was originally made by my friend. He read it in his mind and gave him a messed up look and returned the note. My friend was known as the sausage sucker from then on. Story 6. My best friend and I kept a notebook filled with notes we would pass back and forth. It just made it easier than passing around a single piece of paper. No teacher really questioned us passing a book until we got a student teacher in our English class that was literally 4 years older than we were, 12th grade. He confiscated the book as she was handing it to me. Not only did he read it aloud, but he wrote the contents of the last 2 pages on the board and corrected every grammatical mistake, discussing with the class why it was wrong and what we could do to improve our writing. This was especially mortifying for my best friend because she had just written that she thought she might have a crush on me and wasn't sure what to do next because she was straight. There is a lot to unpack there. Was the teacher hoping to engage the kids more in grammar? Were the kids more interested because of the subject matter? And what happened to these two? Was there a relationship? We need follow-up answers. Story 7. A few years back, the couples in 8th grade started passing composition notebooks back and forth to keep all their notes. Think about that for a second. Each couple's complete collection of hormone-crazed notes compiled in one notebook, a notebook resembling those you use in many of your classes. And these kids are horrible about forgetting stuff, so they were always lying around the room. I made a hobby of flipping through these. Think Us Weekly, but substitute the celebrities for adolescents with few social inhibitions. Then there was the day I came across one for a seemingly innocent, typically awkward couple. I think I've repressed some of the details, but once they started describing acts of face-sitting, I retired from the note-reading hobby. Now I just throw them away. Story 8. Taught high schoolers for a short time. 2 girls in the class were real sweet, but also real talkative when they were together. After threatening to separate them if they didn't shut it, they started passing notes. I caught them in the act. I joked about reading it aloud, and one of the girls turned bright red. She wasn't pleading verbally, but the look she gave me made me glance over the note before I did anything. Put new batteries in my Vibe last night. It feels crazy. I folded the note, put it in my back pocket, and told them to knock it off. No notes were passed again. I still have that scrap lurking in some folder of ephemera somewhere. Story 9. My old debate teacher once had a policy of reading all notes she confiscated out loud. One day, a girl passed a note to another girl and she caught it. She proceeded to read the note out loud, and the note was actually a confession on how her life was miserable and how she wanted to end her life, etc. It was a note basically venting to her friend about all the horrible stuff that she went through. The teacher realized what it was about a quarter of the way through and stopped reading it, but the damage was done. She doesn't read notes out loud anymore. And that seems to be the origin of too much information. We're talking about kids who are just getting into puberty and all of these emotions coming through. Not all of those emotions are warm, fuzzy, happy feelings. Did this girl get any help? I hope she did. Story 10. I was a TA in a genetics lab, and while cleaning up at the end of the day, the professor came up to me and showed me the back of an assignment on which some student had scrawled something odd. It read like a cross between a poem, a prayer, a Bible passage, and hex or something. The student who wrote it was from another country and did not speak or write English well. There was nothing explicit or specific enough for it to be an actual red flag, just creepy as hell. And the student was always nice, so we just chalked it up to some weird poetry. Story 11. This wasn't confiscated per se, but I used to write raps about how hot I thought my psychology teacher was and how much I wanted to passionately stimulate her chest area, etc. I kept these in the back of my binder, and one day out of the blue, she asked to do a binder check. I forgot to take these out, and when my binder was returned, all of them were in the front pocket, and she never said a word about them to me. I have no clue what went through her head. Story 12. Kid in my class wrote, "Corey's mom's a cougar," and passed it to Corey. So Corey wrote, "Curse Harsh. He's a thunder runt." Passed it to Harsh, but got intercepted by Andrew. Andrew wrote, "Hell yeah," and gave it to Tyler. Tyler makes a big ton of noise opening it and laughs so loud. Teacher walks over, looks at it, says, "Outside, now." Kids had to beg their way out. This was all in middle school too, just when we first started learning these words. When I read that story out loud, I was actually thinking of South Park. The kids in the story are about the same age and they're all discovering those words. I think Tyler here is Cartman. Of course it would be Cartman. He's the one that screwed things up for everybody else. Story 13. I'm a principal at an elementary school. One of the teachers had a terrible case of food poisoning. She brought her own lunch, not the school lunch, and I had to fill in for her because we can't find a sub midday. Within 2 minutes, I intercepted this note. We're lucky to have Principal McAwesomeBaugh substituting. Now we have the privilege of staring at that tub of lard all day long. If I were him, I'd walk my fat butt right into oncoming traffic. Story 14. Not a note per se, I had seen a comic book making the rounds. It wasn't disrupting the class, and it was reading, so I let it go for a while. Finally, I made my way over there. It was extremely gay hentai. Giant phalluses everywhere. Man buttholes everywhere. The young males that were passing it around were very openly homophobic in that way only 8th grade male jocks can be. That one went right to the principal. I am not paid enough to explain that to several moms and dads. Story 15. My 11th grade English teacher, an Indian man, confiscated a drawing of him wearing traditional Indian woman garb. He lectured for the entire class on why Indian women, not men, wear a bindi, forehead dot. His name was T. Bhagwandan, and he allowed his students to call him Teabag. I'm pretty sure he didn't know what it meant. In fact, I'm pretty sure he didn't know English well, because he wrote what as W-A-H-T. This guy could have been cool. Maybe he did know what teabag meant. He didn't seem to get mad at the note, though. And hey, you got to learn some culture about India. This was him literally making the situation a teaching moment. Story 16. I also confiscated a hand-drawn cartoon being passed around. It had 2 scenes. The first was titled Fred Flintstone Giving Dino a Bone, and it featured a happy dinosaur begging for a meat bone. The second scene was titled Fred Flintstone Giving Wilma a Bone, and it featured, well, let's just say that Wilma looked pretty happy. Story 17. Around 8 years old or so. My best friend was moving. Military base school, everyone moved frequently. I sent him a note asking him to ask Jane Smith, obviously fake name, out for me before he left. If she said no, please ask Janice Doe, also fake name, out next. Teacher read it and everyone, but me, had a good laugh. Story 18. This was told by my now retired history professor, who had been teaching for over 50 years. This particular story takes place when he started teaching at what was apparently a really ghetto school. One day, he intercepted a note that a girl was passing back to the guy who sent it to her. It read, "How about giving me oral spicy time? $5. The girl's response read, "Who do you think I am? $7. Do you think she pursued her career ambitions? She seems to be good about negotiating for a better price. Maybe she knows her worth. But seriously, this sounds like a joke that comedians tell in the Catskills. If this is real, then wow." Story 19. My significant other is a 7th grade teacher. Her big sister is also a teacher in the same school. The note said, "I wonder if Mrs. S's sister knows how hot she is. She has the best butt ever. Our miss has better boobs, but her sister's butt is amazing. She brought it home and showed it to me. I thought it was funny as hell. She did not." Story 20. I once had a note confiscated from me in the 4th grade. It was from a boy, my boyfriend, about how I would need to convert to Judaism before we got married. My teacher took it, read it, and then went out in the hall and shut the door. We could still hear her laughing, though. Out of all the stories we've seen here, this one is probably the most wholesome. Out of all the details a relationship could expose on a note, converting to religion before marriage is probably the most wholesome you're going to get. I'm sure people enjoyed this one. Did the teacher read this one before the class? Did she recommend counseling? Story 21. A good friend of mine in middle school was kind of a troublemaker and didn't have a very good relationship with the principal. He wrote a note saying that he was going to kidnap the principal and put her in a wood chipper. If I remember correctly, he got suspended. Story 22. My sister is a great teacher, so I just asked her. She said she took a note away from a guy who received it from a girl 3 seats away. It read, "She teaches 6th graders." Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.